Lawyers for the remaining Boston Marathon bomber are, as expected, pulling out any and all stops to keep their client alive. This as something as seemingly innocuous as a field trip holds a key to the murder trial of another New England notable. Let's get down to business. Welcome back to Midpoint, our top legal analyst from the law offices of O'Brien and Ryan LLP in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Heather Hansen joins us. Heather, always a pleasure. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ed.
Heather, here we go. Let's get started with the Boston Marathon bombing. It's interesting, but I don't think it was really beyond the realm of possibility that with what happened in Paris, what happened in France, the lawyers for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev would say, wait a minute, this is going to hurt our client. Let's move things. It's a wonderful attempt, but Heather, I didn't see anything in any way possible that a judge would allow this to stop it.
And you're right, Ed. The judge has already denied a number of continuance requests, so the fact that he denied this one was not a surprise. It does give the defense yet another reason to appeal this case if he is given the death penalty, but it was really a stab in the dark. In fact, the judge didn't even listen to arguments from the prosecutors. He just denied the motion.
Let's talk about that death penalty case for a moment, because actually in the Washington Post, there was a story that said the alleged Boston Marathon bomber probably will not get the death penalty. Do you think that there's enough here? Do you think, in your own opinion, looking at it as an attorney, that it makes sense and will fit the criteria?
If you are going to give the death penalty, it seems that this would be a case that would be appropriate. That is, that we know it appears that he committed the crime. It doesn't appear that there's going to be a big question with regard to whether or not he committed the crime. So many people who oppose the death penalty say, I could only do it if I was sure, because we have all of these different cases with the DNA showing later that it wasn't actually that person. However, the influence of his brother, I think, will play very heavily into this case. In Massachusetts already, I've been following someone who works for the Boston Globe who's in the courtroom. Already a number of jurors who had passed the first round of negotiations to get on to jury duty are saying they could never vote for the death penalty. Massachusetts is very strongly against it. So all of those things combined lead me to agree with that Washington Post article and think that it is not likely to be instilled here.
Is this maybe, though, sort of a really good hint that we're seeing here? Because the defense attorneys, I mean, they've got spunk, to say nothing less. They're going to try every single thing that goes on here. So this is, I think, a really good indicator of what we're going to face when this goes to trial, correct?
This case is going to be fascinating. I would give anything to be in that courtroom because you have got some of the best death penalty defense attorneys on the case. On top of that, you have some very driven, very good prosecutors on this case. And the facts are fascinating as far as the influence of the brother on the activities here, whether or not he really put together the intent to commit these crimes. It's going to be a long trial, but it is going to be very interesting and awesome lawyering.
Let's switch now to the Hernandez trial, the former member of the New England Patriots who is on trial for murder here. There's a discussion here about taking the jury on a field trip to see the actual site of the murder, and some people are reacting as if, how could this happen? Why the special case? I don't know, but quite frankly, I think if I was on a jury, I think I would want to see where the actual crime was committed.
It happens a lot. It happens more than you might think. You put the jurors on a bus, you take them out to where it was committed, then you have the best possible view of the scene. You remember in that George Zimmerman case, they wanted to do that in that case as well. Oftentimes what the judge says is instead we want you to reenact it, and now with digital technology, we're actually able to reenact things pretty well. But either side has a strong argument that the best possible evidence for this jury would be to go to the scene. So it is likely that that would happen.
We also have in here the the Supreme Judicial Court, rather, talking about a cell phone. Tell us about this.
This is also fascinating. So you have, because Aaron Hernandez is now facing charges on two different cases, he's got the case that's coming up right now with regard to the one murder in the industrial park, and that's in one county. He has the other double murder that he's going to be facing later again in a different county. And the judge in the current case allowed in evidence from his cell phone. He had given his cell phone to his lawyer. She allowed that evidence in. In the other case, the Superior Court, the higher court said that evidence should not be allowed in. It's a good example, Ed, of what happens because different courts make different decisions, and how those decisions may impact on one another is going to be a really interesting and unusual area of the law for everybody involved.
Two trials in Boston that everybody is going to be watching here for some time to come. Okay, Hold on just a second here. We're going to be back with Heather Hansen, turning to another controversial mistrial involving a member of law enforcement. And here comes a good question and an interesting story. The execution of a war veteran has even death penalty advocates wondering if there needs to be a change. Should a former soldier who went to war for his country, suffering from PTSD, be put to death? That question and more coming up when we continue right here on Midpoint. Welcome back, everybody. Once again, let's welcome back our legal expert from the Midpoint legal team. The offices of O'Brien and Ryan LLP in Philadelphia, Heather Hansen joins us. Heather, we got a couple of really interesting cases here involving the military. First up, this is a convicted killer, Andrew Brennan. He murdered a Georgia sheriff's deputy 17 years ago. It's obvious it happened, but he allegedly suffered from PTSD that he developed in combat in Vietnam serving his country. And there's so many people wondering about whether or not a guy who has that happen to him in the service of his country should be put to death. I got to tell you, on either side of the death penalty case, no matter where you stand, this is a fascinating example of the things that need to be considered in all cases.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that there's no black and white when it comes to the death penalty. There are so many shades of gray with regard to what's called mitigating factors. Here, the fact that he had served our country for so long, that he suffered from such severe PTSD. And unfortunately, when he was convicted, it was 2000. A lot has changed with regards to our approach towards our veterans, with our approach towards our mentally ill population. And probably he would not have been given the death penalty currently. But he, in 2000, was convicted and was given the death penalty. And it brings to mind so many issues for everyone involved, either side of the aisle.
Do you think now that attorneys on both sides are going to start looking at this when they do have a PTSD designation here for former veterans? Because certainly it happened once. Unfortunately, it may happen again.
Well, and we've seen other cases since then, Ed, where people have been convicted, veterans have been convicted, have had PTSD, and while they have been convicted, they have not been given the death penalty. So I think that less and less you will see people seeking the death penalty, and less you will see it actually given in cases with veterans who have PTSD. It's just so hard to say that they should be put to death when they gave their lives or tried to give their lives for our country.
Another military connection here. David Petraeus, the Department of Justice and the FBI say that he leaked classified documents or information, if you will, to his mistress at the time, Paula Broadwell. This has so many fascinating connections to it right now because there are those people asking, should he be held to the same contempt and the same level of the law as anybody else who might pass on state secrets? I got to tell you, there is a compelling case, I believe, and again, I'm not the attorney here, but for someone who, no matter who you are, general, president, person off the street, you throw out state secrets, you need to be held accountable.
No doubt about it. And that's, I think, what a lot of people feel about. We need to set a standard and have that standard apply to everyone. Eric Holder is the person who has the final decision making as to whether or not felony charges will go forward against Petraeus. On some of his recent interviews, he seems a little less than inclined to pursue charges. Now, it may well be that the basis for the FBI and the Department of Justice pursuing felony charges is not that strong, and that could be the reason for his reluctance, but I don't get the feel that he's going to go forward with pressing charges.
I got about a minute left here. South Carolina judge declared a mistrial this week. A former police chief charged with murder in the 2011 killing of an unarmed black man. You've had a chance to look at this. You were surprised that this mistrial came so fast, weren't you?
I was really surprised. You know, whenever we have a jury out and they can't come to an agreement, you really, really don't want to just let them go because they've heard all of the evidence, the case has been put on, so you really try to get them to continue to deliberate to try to come back with a verdict. After about 12 hours, they declared a mistrial, and that surprised me that it was that length of time. Now, it may well be that they just felt as though it was never going to move, but usually you try to encourage them to keep going so you don't have to retry this case, which is what's going to happen here.
I only got about 20 seconds left here. There's going to be an awful lot of things that police departments, law enforcement officials are going to have to start answering for. Wouldn't you agree? Because the pressure's on them right now.
Without a doubt, Ed. You know, we're talking about body cameras for police officers. But, you know, you compare that to the case with the PTSD veteran who killed a police officer. There's problems on both sides. And I think we all have to come together and have more discussions and more communication so there's a better relationship to start with.
Undoubtedly. Heather Hansen, always a pleasure to have you on the show. I hear the police sirens in the background. Please don't let them bother you. I'm sure you're going to be okay. Thanks, Heather. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Ed. Have a good day.
All right, take care. You too. Last shot for a Thursday, Friday Eve. No place better to spend it than the water cooler. Oh, my. Help us all when Midpoint continues.